Hi everyone, so welcome to the Wigmore Hall. We're here in a couple of days playing a concert where we'll be playing Beethoven's Opus 130 with the Grosse Fuge. And so today we'll be looking at this Opus 130 and sharing some of our thoughts on it, on the music, on having performed it recently and how it's been feeling up until now. So just quickly to set the scene, Beethoven wrote Opus 130 at the very end of his life when he was already deaf. And it was composed for Prince Galitzin, who commissioned it, along with 127 and 132. And Opus 130 is the third of the set of three. I think it's very interesting that, as far as we know, it seems that Beethoven didn't have an overall plan for his quartet, the way he did for most of his other pieces. He seems to have started it and then gone along with each movement as it was coming to him. He even didn't really have a plan for a six-movement piece, which it ended up being. So after the third movement, he seems to have wanted to write a finale, and then ended up adding two more movements before coming to the finale. And it's somehow reflected in the music. Even the very opening of the piece, there's something so spontaneous and searching about it, in the way that the four instruments play in unison, so there's no harmony. So it's almost as if the music could really go anywhere from there. So the other thing is that it is Beethoven's most diverse quartet. This is both in the characters of each individual movement. They're so clearly defined and so different from one another. Also the key relationships, some of them are so distant that they almost feel unrelated between the movements. And there's also a big disparity in length of the movements. So there's, of course, the Grosse Fuge, which is by far the longest and weightiest last movement that he wrote for a quartet. There's also a very big first movement, but then there's also some very short movements which he reintroduces, and he hasn't done that for a very long time, I think since his Opus 18s probably. And so the second movement is actually the shortest movement he's written for quartet. Self-contained movement, that is. And there's also a fourth movement, which is very short. So if you compare that with the previous two quartets, for example, they were huge length in 127 and 132, endless movements, and so this is something quite new for that period. And all this can give a kind of a feeling of that there's not much connection between the movements. But actually, of course, there are connections and they're hidden. And one of them is a very kind of interesting and unusual connection. It's the fact that in the melody, the last note of each movement is the same as the first note of the next. The only exception to that is between the first and the second movements, where there the connection is the note of the tonality, so B flat major for the first movement and B flat minor for the second. But with all the others, there's this kind of a melodic connection, which is, it's almost as if Beethoven was really sort of taking us by the hand and guiding us to the next movement. So we'll just show you a few of these connections. So between the second and the third movement, we end on a B flat, and we start the third movement also on a B flat. And here, it's even more than just a note connection. There's also the kind of sound world of the beginning of the third movement is still in the B flat minor key of the second. For a couple of bars, it seems as if Beethoven is sort of picking up where he left off, and then just guiding us into the new key of D flat major. It's worth noting also that the beginning of this third movement is exactly the same two notes as the very beginning of the piece. But at the beginning we heard them in unison with the four instruments, so it gave a feeling of just not knowing where we were. Whereas here they're harmonized in such a poignant way, so they take on a completely different meaning. So the next connection we'll show you is between the third and the fourth movements. We finish on a D flat, and we go to a D natural, so it's a note which is altered, a semitone up. And that, together with the fact that it's a kind of very far away key from D flat to G, it gives the feeling that somehow the music is slightly lifted off the ground. And so the next connection that we'll show is the end of the cavatina into the Grosse Fuge. So the cavatina ends on a G, very subdued in the second violin, and then the Grosse Fuge starts on a monumental G in unison again, which is a kind of reminder of the very beginning of the piece. And again, the fugue is in B flat major, but it starts in G major. So it's again as if Beethoven is sort of picking up where he left off and just really taking us from this cavatina into the really main part of the fugue. And just a word about the cavatina. It actually means cavatina, an aria, some kind of a very expressive aria. But I think what is maybe less known, which I didn't know until very recently, is that the origin of the word comes from something to do with digging out or extracting. And I think it's very relevant here. The whole cavatina is in a very low register. I never go higher than this note, which is quite unusual. And there's really a sense of going deeper and deeper, digging into the human soul. And in order to then get to this middle section, the central section, where it's as if we're kind of holding the heart in our hands, this absolutely fragile section marked beklemd, which means oppressed or anguished or sort of gasping for breath. Well, the Grosse Fuge, one of the most extraordinary things I think about it is the fact that Beethoven has taken a form that was traditionally a kind of intellectual form, where the emotions take sort of second place compared to the structure. And he's completely turned that around, and he's written one of the most emotionally charged pieces ever. And actually, as performers, that's quite a difficult balance to find, because when you're playing a fugue, and especially when you're playing this fugue, which is so complex that actually when you look for analysis of it, you won't find two analyses that agree with each other and come to the same conclusion as to, what the real form is, how many fugues there are, where they all start, that kind of thing. They all disagree with each other because it's so complex. So we really want the audience to understand what's going on in the music, of course, and our first approach was to sort of find a kind of hierarchy in the themes, so that some themes might be more important than others at certain times in order for the music to be really understood. But we've found, and actually Peter Kropper pointed this out to us when we played to him, that actually when we do that, or when that's too apparent anyway, we're really missing the point of the piece, because it needs to feel, every part needs to feel like it's a huge struggle to come through. Well, the whole piece is a struggle with some very short moments of relief, and you need to finish the Grosse Fuge absolutely exhausted, both if you're playing it or if you're listening to it. And somehow it just felt like it wasn't right when we were trying so hard to make everything very clear and very intelligible. So it's a hard balance to find. And I think from this feeling of struggle to absolute chaos, there's only a very small margin, so it's a quite hard balance to find. We just wanted to present some of the main themes and some of the ways in which Beethoven transforms the themes through the piece. So we have basically 3 themes on which the whole piece is based. The first theme, I call it the first theme because it's the first one that we hear, and it's also the one that underpins, that it runs through the whole of the fugue. Then we have the second theme, which appears where the fugue per se really starts, as opposed to the introduction. And the whole of this first section, this first part, is built on this second theme and a slightly different version of the first theme, which now has some rests in between each note. Then we have the third theme that comes in the meno mosso section, the much quieter section. And so basically, this is all the material that we have. From this, will derive all the other themes. There will all be transformations of either the first theme and some of them the second theme, but mainly from that first theme that we heard. So the first transformation that appears is still in the meno mosso section. It's a much more lyrical and quiet version of the first theme. So those 2 themes together. And then comes another version of the main first theme. This time it has an uneven rhythm and it's much faster and has much more impetus. And Beethoven is going to sort of play around with that for a short while as a kind of a little intermezzo, or a light-hearted section, which will take us to where the craziness really begins. So now we come to the third part of the fugue, where we're going to have a new version. It's actually a version of the last version of the theme that we've had. So it was going up, if you remember, ta-da, and this time it goes down. The direction of the music is opposite. And also it's interspersed with rests, so there's this kind of interrupting feeling. And it's coupled with the original version of the first theme. And gradually, the theme is going to get reduced to only its ending, so the trill. And almost seamlessly, the trills are going to take over the music, literally. brings us to the most apocalyptic moment in the fugue. In this part, you really have the feeling that Beethoven, if he had any restraints left, or any kind of links to any preconceived formal ideas, they're all gone. And this time, you really have the feeling that absolutely anything could happen. I always think of a kind of a crazy genius scientist that has brought together a certain number of ingredients, and at the point where they come together, he's not in control anymore. You know, the ingredients, the combination of the ingredients is what will make whatever will happen come of it. And it's similar here, where we have all these elements that have got to this point in a very organic fashion. I mean, they all make sense the way that they've been developed. And now one really has the feeling that they've come together to this point, and not even Beethoven knows what's going to happen by putting them together. So concretely, we have the two lower instruments that have these kind of giant steps, which use the intervals of the opening theme, the first theme. In the first violin, I'm only left now with the trill part of the theme, high up in the register. For about 30 bars, that's all I play, is a long trill. And then we have in the second violin this absolutely crazy triplet passage, where again Beethoven uses the intervals from the first theme. So now, using all these elements, Beethoven will bring the music to a conclusion, and then there's a coda which again uses these themes. And just to finish, there's this incredible moment at the end when Beethoven again uses the first and the second themes, which have been, whenever they've appeared together, they've been struggling against each other and sort of in a fight. And just at the very end, he finds a way to reconcile them. So you get one of them that goes upwards, and then the other one that comes down from the heavens, and they have this amazing reconciliation and in a kind of unification gesture. And this brings us to the end of the piece.